being turned, and 2 Phantom IIs were being prepared for launch. The Phantom IIs went to afterburners, and they were about 100 miles or so away from this contact and turned on their conical scan radar to lock on, and it winked out. Just disappeared. After they land on the pipe 35 minutes later, and everybody's settled down, this thing winks back on again, and it's about 12 to 15 miles from the ship, hovering at about 30,000 feet. And in any event, they went out, and the lookouts couldn't see anything. Nobody could see anything. But it was there on our radar scope. It was not a false signal. And my SEAL told me, Jordan, this, what have you got in your log? This never happened. And I wasn't the only one there on watch that night. So anybody who was there at that time knows what I'm talking about and knows that it's the truth. But less than a dozen people knew what went on that night, and that ship had 5,000 men on it. There were documents that I have seen that refer to the Roosevelt having several instances of UFO flyovers, and particularly after they took on board nuclear weapons. And I was on board when they did take those on for the first time.
This particular night, I took a message off the teletype and filed it because it was not to us, and I turned around to check the teletypes again and saw something I had never seen before, and that was that all 8 teletypes were just typing complete garbage, totally incoherent. So I immediately called the facilities control on the intercom to inform them that my broadcasts were out, and they informed me that they were busy because all communications had just gone out, ship-wide. The propulsion system still worked. We could maintain the speed and course, we could steer, but from all the stories that I heard, anything that was electronic in nature ceased to operate. A few seconds later, we heard we had an intercom and a pneumatic tube system that went between the communications room to the signal bridge, which was located on the very top of the island structure of the carrier. And we heard a voice come on, very excited, yelling that God was here, it was the end of the world. And we looked at each other and thought, well, that's strange, what's going on there? Another few seconds went by and another voice came on, more controlled. This person said that there's something over the ship, is what he said, there's something over the ship. Well, I looked at a friend of mine, a shipmate, and he looked at me, and we decided to go have a look. We observed a large glowing sphere over the island structure of the ship, over the ship. It was hard to decide what size this thing was because there was no perspective. It was late in the evening, the sun had gone down, it was twilight, but it looked huge. I would say anywhere from 300 or 400 feet to a quarter of a mile, depending on how high it was. It glowed in a pulsating manner between a yellowish and an orangish color. I couldn't see any details other than a glowing spherical object. Unfortunately, I only got to observe this object for less than 30 seconds because by the time we got out there and started looking at it, general quarters went off on the ship, battle stations. We had to go back to our watch station, which was our battle stations. A few days later, the commanding officer and the executive officer came on the closed-circuit television system that we had on board. It was the only way they could address the crew of 5,000. He looked at the camera, and I'll never forget this. He looked at the camera and he said, "I would like to remind the crew that certain events that take place on board a major naval combatant vessel are considered classified and should not be discussed with anyone without any need to know." Some men arrived on the ship when we returned to Norfolk to interview some people in suits. Lord knows where they came from, what agency they were from. I'm convinced that there's something to it. I'm convinced that the government, somebody in the government knows a lot more than we know.
Merle Shane McDowell worked for the United States Navy in 1981 and had a top secret SCI, Special Compartmented Intelligence clearance with zebra stripes. What this means is that he was one of a few people cleared to be in the command center at the Atlantic Command Facility near Norfolk, Virginia. during very critical events, including thermonuclear war. Merle Shane McDowell's testimony establishes that an object came in off the northern North American coast, was tracked on 4 or 5 radar stations, that jets were scrambled from multiple facilities to intercept and to attempt to force down this object which came from space. He will also testify that this object moved in one radar sweep from off the northern coast of North America to off the coast of Norfolk, Virginia, and then down to off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Admiral Harry Train, who was Commander-in-Chief, Atlantic Command, was present during this event, witnessed it, and was involved in scrambling jets to intercept and to attempt to force down this object.
I was granted, after a 6-month wait, a top secret special compartmented intelligence clearance with a zebra stripe identification badge, which permitted access to all facilities on the base at all times. It's the highest level of alert that the Navy has or had at that time for dealing with generally dealing with global nuclear threats. When you set a condition zebra, whether it's a drill or not, people who are not authorized to be there who do not have a zebra access badge, it's a zebra stripe badge on your clearance badge, they have to leave the command facility, and we have Marines stationed outside the building there, in the building and as well as outside, that were under orders to shoot any unauthorized personnel that remained in the command center. They would announce it beforehand: this is a drill, set condition zebra. And unauthorized personnel would be escorted out of the command center if they didn't already know that they had to leave. But they turned the lights down this time, and they didn't say this is a drill. There's a door right here, and this guy, the Marine, comes in and wants to know what's going on. Is this a drill or so forth? They've got orders to start shooting people. And I know because I actually got the junior OOD's attention and said, hey, you guys need to tell this guy something. He's ready to start shooting people, because they haven't told him to stand down yet, and which he did. And I remember, wanting to just get the hell out of there. We had contact with an unidentified flying object that had entered our airspace. And at that point, when Admiral Train found out that it wasn't the Soviets, and that he wanted to know were the Soviets responding to this threat also, that was the moment that he gave authorization to put 2 planes up to go see what this thing was. Pilots, you could hear the pilots' live voice transmissions being piped into the command center, visual confirmation on the object, description of the objects. Pilots were able to close a couple of times and be able to see that the object was not an aircraft that we were familiar with, was nothing that we had, was nothing the Soviets had, and that was determined very quickly. This thing absolutely had complete control of the situation and could just be wherever it wanted to be just in a matter of seconds. One minute we're closing on it off the coast of Maine. The next minute it's in Norfolk, headed south towards Florida. As Admiral Train was doing, he was scrambling, authorizing planes up just left and right, up and down the whole eastern seaboard. It headed out over the Atlantic, towards the Azores. I do remember them saying that it had pulled up at a 66-degree angle as it approached the Azores, like this, and it just pulled up at a 66-degree angle without slowing down or anything, and left the atmosphere, just was gone. It just took off into space and was gone, and just like that. The only descriptions that I recall that the pilots actually made were that they could not find any markings on the aircraft. They could not find any visible signs that the thing had wings, a tail, windows, a cockpit, or anything like that, or any markings from any country. They did get close enough to get some photographs taken that were later brought over to the command center. Well, from the photograph, I could remember the shape. What I would have said would have been, I would say a cylinder. I would say a cylinder because it was abrupt. It had abrupt ends. The ends didn't taper down like most aircraft.
When over one of the B-52s, which were armed with nuclear weapons, there appeared a bluish haze, almost in the form of a boomerang or a wing shape. And in this haze, there was a glittery light. We had no idea what this was. And we do know that the SAC teams were called to ready, so they came out to the plane. But prior to that, this just hovered over the plane for a short period of time and then just vanished. It wasn't as if you actually saw it glide away. It was like in a wisp, it was gone. This was something that actually showed up on radar, and the perimeter guard saw it, and the other people on the other post, because there's one person per B-52 bomber.
Astronaut Gordon Cooper is one of the heroes of our country. He witnessed not only a daytime UFO event in Germany, but in addition, while working and connected to the U-2 project at Edwards Air Force Base, his team had one of these objects land in broad daylight at Edwards Air Force Base. It was filmed. He oversaw this film being developed and sent to the Pentagon under special circumstances. Again, this is a hero of our country, astronaut Gordon Cooper, stating that one of these objects, a UFO, landed in the 50s at Edwards Air Force Base, and it was filmed. He saw the film, and it was sent back to the Pentagon. And his testimony cannot be contradicted because of the credibility that this great man has.
We were flying in Germany, and we were flying F-86s. And they would come over and do the same maneuvers that we make, except every once in a while one of them would go zip. And you just can't do that in a fighter, a conventional fighter. I was having some cameramen film the installation of a precision landing facility that we were putting in right on the edge of the dry lake. And this saucer flew right over them and put down 3 little gear and landed out on the dry lake bed. And they went out to, picked up their cameras and moved on out toward him filming. And he lifted off, put the gear back in the well, and climbed out at a very high rate of speed and disappeared. And so while I was going through all the regulation books and finding out the number to call in Washington to report it, I had them go over and develop the film. By the time they got back with the developed film, I was on the higher and higher and higher level officer talking to me. Finally with the colonel telling me to, when the film arrived at my desk, to put it in the carrier pouch. There would be a courier there at my office by that time already, and they'd arranged for him to fly in our base airplane back to Washington with these films. I had a chance to hold it up to the window and look at it. It was certainly a good film. I think they're for real. I think eventually we'll find out that there's regular travel here on this Earth from other planets.
Carl Wolf worked for the military and was at Langley Air Force Base as an Air Force technician during the 1960s. While there, and in his capacity working on some devices in a very secret area of Langley, he was shown by another technician photographs taken by the lunar orbiter prior to the lunar landing of structures on the moon